She escaped through the wrong window, only to find the Alpha King waiting inside. Nadia Calloway had always been good at leaving. She knew which floorboards creaked in every apartment she had ever lived in. She knew how to pack a bag in under 4 minutes. She knew how to smile at a neighbor in the hallway, while her hands were still shaking from whatever had just happened behind a closed door. Leaving was not something she was proud of. It was simply something she had become very good at, the way some people become good at cooking or painting, through years of quiet, necessary practice. On the night of October 14th, she came home from a double shift at the clinic, smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. She had worked 14 hours. Her feet hurt. All she wanted was a cup of tea and 8 hours of sleep. She noticed the light in her apartment was off. She had left it on. She stood in the hallway for a moment, key in hand, and listened. There was no sound from inside, no movement. But she had lived long enough in the company of danger to know that silence was not always safe. Silence was sometimes just danger holding its breath. She did not go inside. Instead, she walked to the bathroom window at the end of the hall, a shared access point that the building's old layout had never quite resolved, and she climbed through. She told herself she would just check from the fire escape. She told herself she would look through her window from outside and see if everything was fine. It was not fine. Through the glass, she could see Marcus sitting in her kitchen chair. He had a bottle in his hand, and the particular kind of stillness that meant he had been waiting for a while and was not planning to leave. She knew that stillness. She had learned to fear it the way other people feared thunder. She did not think clearly after that. Thinking clearly had never been her strong point when Marcus was involved. What she did instead was climb. Up, not down, because her hands made the decision before her brain did, and her hands had always chosen up over down, escape over confrontation, the unknown over the certain danger below. She climbed one full floor before she realized her mistake. By then, her arms were tired, and the cold October air had made her fingers stiff, and there was an open window right in front of her, warm light spilling from behind a curtain. She told herself she would climb in, catch her breath, and find the stairs. She told herself whoever lived here would understand. She told herself a lot of things in those few seconds. Then she pulled herself through the window and fell onto a hardwood floor. She lay there for a moment, face down, gathering what remained of her dignity. The floor was very clean. The room smelled like cedar and something darker, something that reminded her of forests after rain. She pushed herself up onto her knees and looked around. The apartment was large, much larger than hers. The ceilings were high, the furniture was dark and serious, and every surface was clean in the way that suggested not the absence of mess, but the presence of someone who did not tolerate it. Books were stacked on a side table with military precision. A single lamp burned in the corner. And standing near the kitchen doorway, holding a glass of water and watching her with an expression of complete calm, was a man she had never seen before. He was tall, dark-haired. He had the kind of face that was difficult to look away from, not because it was perfect, but because it was serious, in a way that made you feel like looking away would mean missing something important. His eyes were a shade of gray that did not quite look natural, and they were fixed on her with an attention that felt, strangely, less like alarm and more like recognition. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Nadia, still on her knees on his floor, said, "I can explain." He said nothing. "I live downstairs," she continued. "I climbed the wrong direction. I'm sorry about your window. I'll leave right now if you just point me toward the stairs." He set his glass down on the counter very slowly. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was quiet, not soft. There was nothing fragile about it, but quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are accustomed to being listened to without raising their volume. "No," she said, getting to her feet. Her hands were still trembling slightly, though she did her best to hide it. "There's someone in your apartment," he said. It was not a question. She stopped. "How do you know that?" He did not answer directly. Instead, he walked to a cabinet, pulled out a clean glass, filled it with water from the tap, and set it on the kitchen counter closest to her. "Sit down," he said. "You're safe here." Nadia did not sit down. She had been told she was safe by people who did not mean it, too many times, and in too many rooms. She stood near the window she had come through, and looked at him with the careful, measuring expression she had developed over years of learning to assess people quickly. "Who are you?" she asked. "Cassian Voss," he said. "I own the top 3 floors of this building." He paused. "You're the nurse from 4C. How do you know where I live?" "I know everyone who lives in this building," he said simply. "I make it my business to." It should have been unsettling. Somehow it was not. There was no threat in the way he said it. It was a statement of fact, delivered without performance. Nadia crossed her arms. "I need to borrow your phone." "Of course." He handed her his without hesitation. She called the police. She gave them Marcus's name and her apartment number, and listened while they told her a unit would be there in 20 minutes. When she hung up, she realized her hands had stopped shaking. She was not sure when that had happened. Cassian was leaning against the kitchen counter, watching her with that same unhurried attention. "Thank you," she said, handing the phone back. "I'll wait in the hallway." "You don't have to," he said. "I know I don't have to." "Then stay. The tea is already on." She almost left anyway. Old habit. But her feet hurt, and the hallway was cold, and there was something about this particular room and this particular man that felt, against all reason, like standing on solid ground after a long time on water. She stayed. The police came. Marcus was removed. Nadia was told she could return to her apartment, and she did, and she locked every lock twice, and then sat on her kitchen floor for a long time without turning the light on. In the morning, there was a knock at her door. It was not Cassian. It was a young woman, very polished, who introduced herself as his assistant and explained that Mr. Voss had arranged for the building's legal team to assist Nadia in filing a formal restraining order, should she want one, at no cost to her. There was also, the assistant added almost as an afterthought, a vacancy on the 6th floor if Nadia wanted a temporary change of environment while things were sorted. Nadia stared at her for a moment. "Tell Mr. Voss," she said, "that I appreciate it, and that I'll think about it." She thought about it for exactly 1 day. Then she took the 6th floor apartment. She told herself it was practical. It probably was. But she also found herself, in the evenings, more aware than she should have been of the fact that Cassian Voss lived 2 floors above her, and that he had given her his phone without a second thought, and that his apartment had smelled like cedar and forest rain. She ran into him on a Wednesday. He was coming out of the elevator as she was going in, carrying a bag of groceries, and looking like a man with 17 more important things to do. He held the elevator door for her, and they rode up together in silence for 1 floor. "How are you settling in?" he asked, just before the doors opened for her. "Fine," she said. "Thank you, for everything." "You don't need to thank me." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." The doors opened. She stepped out. She did not look back, but she heard the elevator continue upward, and she stood in the hallway for a moment longer than necessary before going inside. 3 weeks passed. She learned things about him in the way you learn things about people when you live in the same building and pay attention. He was up before dawn every morning. He had visitors sometimes, serious, quiet men, who arrived and left quickly. He did not have parties. He did not play music loudly. He gave money to the woman who sold flowers on the corner downstairs, always in cash, always without stopping to talk. He was, she concluded, one of the loneliest people she had ever observed from a distance. She was thinking about this one night when she heard something in the parking garage below her window, a sound that did not belong, a voice she didn't recognize, sharp and threatening. And then another voice, Cassian's, low and steady. She looked out. What happened next was something she could not explain by any logic she had grown up with. It was something that rewrote, in approximately 45 seconds, everything she thought she understood about the world. She watched Cassian Voss change. She stood at the window with one hand pressed flat against the glass, and she watched it happen, and she did not scream. She wasn't sure why she didn't scream. Perhaps she was too astonished. Perhaps some part of her, some deep and old and knowing part, was not as surprised as it should have been. The man who had threatened him left quickly after that, running actually. When Cassian looked up and saw her at the window, he went very still. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she mouthed, through the glass, "Come upstairs." He told her everything. He sat on her couch, elbows on his knees, and he spoke plainly, and without apology. He was the alpha king of the northern wolf packs. He had come to Crestholm because his people had detected something, a bloodline they had believed was gone, a human lineage that carried a rare gift, the ability to read truth, to feel bonds between people like physical things, to anchor the alpha's strength during conflict in a way no one fully understood, but no one disputed. The bloodline was hers. Her grandmother, the woman Nadia had loved more than anyone in her life and lost at age 9, had been the last known seer of the northern packs. Nadia sat across from him and listened without speaking. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I always knew when people were lying," she finally said. "Since I was little, I thought everyone could do that." "They can't," he said. "And you came here looking for me." "I came here following a signal," he said. "I didn't know it was you specifically. I want to be honest about that. Meeting you the way I did." He paused. That was not planned. She believed him. She believed him the same way she always knew when people were telling the truth. Not through logic, but through something older and quieter that lived in her chest. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing you don't choose to give," he said. "I want to be clear about that too." She looked at him for a long moment. He met her gaze without flinching, which was, she thought, rarer than people realized. "Okay," she said. "I'll think about it." He nodded. He stood to leave. "Cassian," she said. He paused. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, something quieter than that. "Thank you for listening," he said. A summit was coming. She learned about it gradually, through conversations that grew longer and more honest, as November moved toward December. A rival pack had challenged Cassian's authority over the Northern Territory. He was required, by the laws of his world, to appear before the regional pack leaders and prove his claim. The complication was simple and enormous. A seer, who stood beside the Alpha at a summit, was not merely a witness. She was, by ancient custom, an ally, a declared partner. It was not ownership, it was not obligation, but it was a choice that could not be taken back. Cassian explained all of this to her on a cold Tuesday evening, sitting across from her in her kitchen with 2 cups of tea between them, and he was so careful to be fair, so deliberate about giving her every reason to say no, that she found herself watching him more than listening to him. This was a man who had spent his entire life being obeyed, and here he was, working very hard to make sure she knew she didn't have to. She took 3 days. She thought about her grandmother, who had lived quietly and bravely, and never explained the unusual light she seemed to carry. She thought about Marcus, and every door she had locked behind her, and every window she had climbed through going the wrong direction. She thought about the parking garage and Cassian's voice, low and steady, even in the middle of something terrifying. On the 3rd evening, she knocked on his door. When he opened it, she said, "I've spent my whole life climbing out of windows. I think it's time I walked through a door." The summit was held in a large, old building at the edge of the territory, full of people who looked at Nadia with the measuring eyes of those who understood exactly what her presence meant. She stood beside Cassian. She did not hold his hand. She did not need to. When the rival Alpha made his accusation, a treaty violation, stated with great confidence and very little truth, Nadia felt it the way she always felt lies, like a wrong note in an otherwise clear sound. She spoke. Her voice was steady. She did not shout. She simply named what she had felt, plainly and precisely, and explained why it was false, and the room was very quiet while she did it. Cassian won the summit without raising a hand. Afterward, they stood outside in the cold night air. The others had gone inside. It was just the 2 of them, and the dark, and the sound of wind in the trees. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "You could have just stood there." "I could have," she agreed, "but I didn't want to." He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. They walked to the car together, and neither of them said anything else, but it was the kind of silence that is not empty, the kind that is full of something that doesn't need words yet, that is happy to wait, that knows it has time. Nadia Calloway had always been good at leaving. She was only just learning how good she might be at staying.